Most adults with ADHD learned at an early age that how their minds work don't exactly fit the typical mold. They were told to become like everyone else, concentrate harder, and stop daydreaming. Numerous myths and misconceptions about ADHD that are now considered fact, and some don't even believe it's real.
I think it's like asking, is hypertension real? Is heart disease real?
Psychiatrist Dr. Josh Warren says in the medical community, ADHD isn't a controversy, and there is vast amounts of data proving it's a legitimate biological development issue in the brain.
You can see differences on imaging studies between people that have ADHD and people that don't. You can see differences on real-time brain scans on people treated with ADHD medications that correct to norm. It's very real.
And educators can agree with Dr. Warren, even as they see it from a different angle.
100% it's real. From an education standpoint, I've seen kids that have been diagnosed as ADD or ADHD where it was a behavior problem. But when you deal with it enough, 100% you can see the cases where it is real.
I know it's very real too, but most of us ADHD minds have encountered the same mistakes, failures, and felt the emotional sting of being negatively stereotyped.
I hear a lot of the things you're saying from people all the time. I see a lot of people who describe, very similar difficulties in terms of feeling like either people in their lives, whether it's cultural or just people's own personal views on what ADHD is.
Living with a mind that's never idle is similar to being a passenger on a speeding train, because turning in a new direction when we want to do it just isn't difficult. It can't be done.
The most common things you hear about kids who have ADHD are that teachers are telling the parents that they're struggling with hyperactivity and they can't sit still, and they keep telling them to do something over and over again and they won't listen, and they're struggling academically.
It can also impact those teaching, even if they know what signs to look for.
Kids with ADHD, you can kind of watch it build. You got about usually anywhere between 5-15 minutes. If they're sitting still, beginning a lesson, something like that, you can kind of see kids will start to fidget and maybe tapping the foot, maybe tapping the pencil on the desk. And it's almost like a compulsion that kid has to get up and move. At some point, they can't sit still.
Casey Pirtle spent 11 years teaching English in high school and is now an assistant principal. He struggled at times with ADHD students, but he quickly points out that those students really do try, and at times are quite surprising, but in a good way.
It will amaze you how efficient they can be. A kid with ADD who's really trying to do well is going to look at that and be like, okay, I got to find a way to get this done quicker, because in 15 minutes I'm done.
Casey doesn't have ADHD, but he says there are reasons he understands it better than most.
One, of course, is going through college. It keeps it interesting. My wife, she is ADD as well.
And what he calls interesting is very common among the ADHD population.
Most people's minds would travel from point A to point B. When you're dealing with someone with ADD or ADHD, you may get to point B eventually, but for the person with ADD, it's point F. We went to point A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. We went through the entire alphabet.
The diagnosis is important, but it's secondary to following it up with proper treatment.
If you have ADHD and it's untreated, it impacts you negatively academically in terms of your ability to succeed. It impacts you in your job as an adult, and it impacts you socially in both.